Kia ora koutou, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar on hot tips for funding. It's great to have you all here. So I'm Francesca, I'm a regional advisor on the capability team at Charity Services. We're part of the Department of Internal Affairs, and you might hear us refer to DIA, so that's Department of Internal Affairs. I'll just go through a few logistics before we meet our guests and we get started. So this is a listen-only webinar, so you won't be able to speak, but we will have time for your questions later. You can see there's a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. You can use this feature to ask your questions during the webinar. It really helps if the questions are general so that everyone listening can get something from them. And if you have some really specific questions about your charity and a grant you have received or you want to apply for, you can get in touch with a community advisor and have a chat. If you're experiencing problems with your sound, try using some headphones. The webinar is being recorded and we will send you a link to it and a resource sheet that we will send out later. If your question does not get answered today, it's important that it does, so please email us. The email address is info@charities.govt.nz, info@charities.govt.nz, and we'll get back to you with an answer. So I'd like to welcome our special guest today, Valerie Williams. Kia ora, Valerie.
Kia ora, Francesca.
Valerie works as a community advisor for the Department of Internal Affairs in the Hāpai Hāpori Community Operations. They're the team that administer the lottery and the COGS grants, and they have other grants as well. So as I said before, Charity Services is also part of the Department of Internal Affairs, and it's great to have a team of community advisors working alongside us to help us reach the grassroots charities. So Valerie has worked for funding organisations for many, many years, and she's got a lot of experience, and she's here today to give you some tips on how to apply for funding. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Valerie. Very nice of you to come in.
Thank you.
Could you tell our audience a bit about what your role entails as a community advisor for Hāpai Hāpori?
Sure. So basically community advisors are here to help through providing information and advice to communities. That can be on things like how to start a community group or charity, how to set up some processes or improve your group's policies and processes, how to access grants, those provided by DAA, and also some funding tips for other funding sources, and perhaps helping you to connect with others that are doing similar work to you in the community or have facing similar problems. So we're located throughout the country. There's an office in Kaitaia, one in Invercargill, west coast of the South Island, Taranaki, Gisborne, and there's more detail about what we do on the Community Matters website, which I think the link we'll be sharing with you. And there's lots of other useful information on that website too. And some of our advisors are specialists in community-led development, some are experts in facilitation. So, or if they aren't, they can connect you with someone who is good at doing those sorts of things.
Fabulous. There's a lot of you around the country, isn't there?
There is.
Fantastic. And so before we get into the hot tips part of the webinar, can you tell us a little bit about the types of funds that you manage?
Yes, so the Department of Internal Affairs, or DIA, has quite a few funding streams, but the two main ones that your local advisor will talk to you about are Lotteries Community and the Community Organisations Grant Scheme, or COGS. So Lottery Community's purpose is quite broad. It's for organisations or projects improving people's lives and communities. There's a little bit more guidance on the Community Matters website, but basically it's things like volunteering, supporting vulnerable people, promoting cultural identity, generally helping people feel they belong and can take part in their community. COGS, the Community Organisation Grant Scheme, that's also for community-based work, but it's a little bit more targeted towards local social services and for smaller organisations. So it's for organisations that have OPEX of less than $2 million.
Can you just tell us what OPEX means?
So operating expenditure.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah. And just to give you some context, if you're thinking about which one do I apply to? The average size of a lottery community grant is about $30,000,
Right.
and the average size of a COGS grant is $3,000. But just in brief, if you're doing some work in the community and you're clear about what benefits you're trying to achieve and the outcomes, then look on the section on the Community Matters website that says for organisations to see what funding's available. And the COGS, or the Community Organisation Grants team, that funding opens today. So that's the smaller grants of an average size of $3,000.
Great, so that's a good hot tip, isn't it? And who's eligible to apply for these kinds of grants?
So our grants are for not-for-profit groups or charities. To receive more than $10,000, you must be a legal entity. So that's something like an incorporated society or a charitable trust or a charitable company. Right. Or you have a fund holder that's a legal entity. And it's really important for people to know that being registered with Charity Services doesn't make you a legal entity. It's a separate, which you're an expert in, Francesca, can probably talk about more. And there is more guidance about that on the Charity Services website and the Community Matters website, or you may want to get some legal advice and contact someone to talk about it a little bit more. But remember, if you're not a legal entity, you can still apply for funding from DIA if you're an informal community group, but the maximum that you can receive is $10,000.
Right, and we do have information on the Charity Services website. We have a video about different structures, and it will explain legal entities, where you can get in touch with either community operations or someone at Charity Services if you are still questioning that. So today we're talking about funding for organisations rather than individuals, and offering some tips so they can be more successful. What are some other potential income streams for organisations, so apart from grants?
Yeah, so we will talk about grants in a little bit more detail, but other sources of income that not-for-profit groups should look at are things like personal donations, so individual giving or bequests, corporate sponsorship, crowdfunding, so things like Give a Little, as government contracts, social enterprise, and basically the more sources of income you have, the less risk there is to your organisation if one of those sources of income doesn't provide the return that you were hoping for. And if you Google sources of funding for not-for-profits, you'll easily be brought up the most common 6 or 7. There's lots of websites out there that tell you that, so you don't have to remember them all now or replay the webinar. It's really readily available on the internet. And one site I looked at said there were 15 sources, but
wow,
some of them may have just been variations on a theme, but from
so the key is communication.
Yes, keep the communication open.
Excellent. So specifically in relation to applying for grants, it'd be good to talk about how to improve success. What makes a good application? So just starting off with the basics, what do people need to be aware of if they're making an application? And they've never done it before. I mean, it's a new thing.
Yeah. Again, there's lots of good guidance on the internet about writing successful applications, but I'll just emphasise a few things. The first is to check you're fit for a funder. Look closely at what they say they fund, their criteria and your eligibility. If I use the Community Organisation Grant Scheme, COGS as an example, that's for delivering community-based social services. So if you're a sports team who wants funding to go to a tournament in Australia, COGS wouldn't be right. They've missed out on a funding round by day. Yeah. And unfortunately, funders do tend to be quite strict about the closing dates. Because demand for funding often exceeds supply, and so there aren't many arguments that work to get a funder to accept a late application, so best to meet those deadlines.
Right.
And actually also check the time of closing too. There's a big difference between 5 p.m. and midnight.
Yes, yeah.
So I think most funders do tend to use midnight as a closing date, or 11:55 p.m, but just double check that it's not 5 p.m. On the day. And the fact is that, dates do change from year to year. So keep an eye keep it on the website, get yourself added to e-newsletters, Facebook pages. There's normally reminders coming up of funding rounds that are closing.
So it'd probably be helpful too to have a funding calendar that you renew every year.
Yeah. Keep track in whatever way suits the best. You know, sometimes just a list on the fridge can be helpful.
Totally. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Most people, there's great tips, Valerie.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And actually, I should have said, just make sure you follow the funder's instructions.
Right.
You know, if they say they need 2 quotes, you know, give them
Provide
2 quotes. They want your financials and bank accounts uploaded, then upload them. And you know, it is a tough game, you know, and unfortunately there are funders that may immediately put you in a decline if they've asked for 2 quotes and you've only given them 1 quote. You know, it can be really tough like that. So yeah, follow those instructions.
So really know what is being asked of you. It's a bit like a job interview.
Yes, it is. Yeah, provide the paperwork. Yeah.
So most people in charities are super busy, and sometimes things can be left to the last minute. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, I've been one of those last minute people running that cash very late.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's just reality. We all do leave things to the last minute, but no surprise to you, it's not ideal, so please don't. Just if you need some feedback, if you're okay, then obviously, and you're happy, confident with what you're doing, then last minute is, you know, quite possible. But you know, we're just not going to have the capacity to provide feedback in the last day to people who've got inquiries about, you know, what fund they, you know, what they should be particularly doing and things like that.
And I suppose if they've missed something and it's last minute, then how do you get to tell them that if the fund's closed? Right.
And there are things you can do to prepare in advance, even before a funding round opens. You know, for example, to apply for funding from the Department of Internal Affairs, you need to be registered on the grant management system. And there's a little bit of a process to doing that. You know,
that's real name.
Yes, that's right. And so you can do that now. You don't have to wait for a funding round to open. And also, maybe your organisation's already registered, but all the contacts have changed. And the person who did the previous application is no longer with the organisation, but you can get that sorted now before a funding round has opened. And you can look at those instructions in advance as well. So Lottery Community asks for a budget to be uploaded with a request, but it has particular requirements that they want the budget to meet, or we want the budget to meet. So look at that now and get yourself organised.
Way before. No, great advice. Community Matters website has some budget templates, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And most funders, if they ask for something in particular, they will provide you with direction or guidance into which form they want something given.
Fantastic. So are the application forms available then on your website so people can look at the questions for a DAA fund? Yeah,
unfortunately our application forms aren't on the website all the time, and that's they may change slightly from round to round. But some funders do have them on their website, so it's variable. But if you don't, like for the Department of Internal Affairs, you can just contact us and say, you know, can you let me know what the questions are in the application form, and a community advisor will be able to share those with you. And also there are variations between what funders require. Some have word limits, some don't. Some just provide general guidance about how long an answer should be. My general advice is to keep it succinct and clear. DIA really likes bullet points. And it's also kind of just good writing practice. You know, lead with your main point. Don't write 3 paragraphs or a page of material and then kind of say the ultimate thing that you're looking for funding for. So just that clear writing style.
Bullet points. That's a good idea. Excellent. So I'm just thinking about some of the groups that we've got on the charities register, and And I know that some might need some support for getting fund ready because they just don't have the capability, or they may have some language barriers. What can you offer for groups like that?
Yeah, so as
They
I
might
said,
be small too, they might have just started.
yeah. So as I said, community advisors are here to help, so we can meet with groups to work through their ideas and to see how they may fit with DIA's funding streams and to support them. We can't write the application for them, but we can give lots of good advice and feedback, and we also have a checklist of requirements for a group to have before they think about applying.
Excellent.
And people don't need to write things down, but it's generally things like having documentation about your setup and your purpose, your rules or a constitution, a bank account with 2 signatories, and having someone who's responsible for those finances and keeping track of them, and doing how that's reported back to a management committee.
Making minutes.
Yeah, keeping minutes of meeting is really important, and have a record of that so that you can, refer back to them in the future if needs be. Yeah.
Fantastic. What about, so once you've got your grant and you've carried out your project and you've done all the things, what do you need to do then for an internal affairs grant?
Yeah, so for our internal affairs, DIA, we do require a written report. And when you put in a request to DIA, there's some terms and conditions that you have to agree to, and that talks about our reporting requirements. And if you are successful in getting a grant, you'll get reminded about what those reporting requirements are. So DIA requires a written report to be submitted a year after you've received funding, and you'll just tell us how you spent the grant and what community outcomes were achieved, plus provide some financial reporting information. Other funders have different reporting requirements, and generally you'll get told about them if you're successful in receiving a grant, and some may not require written reporting. They may prefer to do a face-to-face meeting.
I've heard that that's a thing that's used much more often.
It is. It's kind of that particularly relationship-based funders, or who are maybe not funding so many people as the Department of Internal Affairs. They have the opportunity to do that a little bit more face-to-face.
Yeah, a bit more personal, I suppose. Internal Affairs, which give out a lot of lottery and COGS grants and other grants. Also, could you tell me a little bit about multi-year funding? So I've heard about it, I've never actually had to apply for it. How do you apply for multi-year funding? And tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So again, every funder is different. Some offer multi-year, some don't, and the situation may change for a funder from year to year as well. So unfortunately, the financial markets are down a little bit at the moment. So some funders have had to reduce the amount of funding that they're possibly going to offer in the year ahead, or they may not be offering multi-year funding at the moment. So last year, Lottery Community was able to offer 2 years of funding for those organisations that had an established track record with us. So the answer is just really read the application form carefully and make sure you see if it says multi-year funding is available, and if you meet the criteria, for DIA, if you've got an established track record, then you can apply and look at that, and then other funders will have their own priorities and things like that.
Fantastic.
And the other thing I forgot to mention is, it's perfectly fine to reuse applications from year to year for the Lottery Community.
You don't have to think of some amazing new thing.
No, just, if you applied last year and were successful, that's obviously was a good application, and it doesn't guarantee that you will be successful again this year, but it's perfectly fine to reuse it. Maybe just recheck the priorities of Lotteries Community to make sure that what you wrote last year still fits, and update all the statistics and things like that. But it's okay to just repeat what you did.
Fantastic. That's good to know, isn't it?
Yeah. And our system actually just lets you copy across a previous application. So
Copy and paste.
yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So that's a good thing to do there as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah. But we always recommend, and even though your application stays on our system and is available, we always recommend keep your own copy as well.
But
In your own separate in your form. Yeah.
Amazing. So, I mean, really that is, we're coming to the end of our hot tips discussion, but I mean, what I've heard is communication is key really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So kind of doing a bit of homework, talking to your funders, knowing priorities, knowing closing dates, being organised is the key, and then making sure you communicate well.
Yeah, and another really good tip is you may be the fundraiser, get someone else to proofread your work.
Right. Okay.
Get a second pair of eyes on a request that you may be about to submit, because they may pick up something that you didn't look at.
And it's so easy to have a spelling mistake or
or not checked a box, or not seeing that multi-year funding is available and it's available. So good to have that review.
Cool. And the other real hot tip that I thought was that the different income streams. I mean, I really like that piece of the conversation where you talked about actually diversifying. So looking at other ways you can fund your organisation that's not just grant funding.
Yeah.
That sounds like it's a robust organisation if you can manage to do that.
Yeah.
Wow, great discussion. I have learnt a few things over the last, we've had a few meetings to get this off the ground, and we didn't just make all this up today. But it's time to wrap up this part of the presentation, and we're going to take some questions from the audience now. So I hope that you've all been putting your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will go over to those now. Just bear with me while I find the right screen. Here we go. Okay, so the first question, I'll read them out and you can answer them. How does that work?
Sure,
All right,
yeah.
cool. So we want to have a chat to a community advisor about our next project. Do we just email, or is it better to call?
That probably comes down to a little bit to personal preference. There is an 0800 number to call, which we can share. At the moment, just like everybody, there's a few resourcing issues, so you'll have to leave a message on an answer machine and someone will get back to you. I personally prefer email, because then you've got a record of your conversation and what you're trying to find out, and we can share the email. And also your local offices have ways of contacting them too, and if you just go to the Community Matters website, there's a button on the homepage that says find us, and you can push on that and it'll tell you how to contact local offices as well.
Fabulous. Fabulous. And so really what works for you?
Yeah,
that's right. I mean, some people like email better and some people like chatting on the phone. Cool. Once my organisation has secured a grant, can the time for the grant to be extended change? Or what if things have changed and the organisation would like to change what the grant is spent on?
Yeah, so we do offer extensions, potentially. The terms and conditions say it must be spent within a year, but obviously sometimes there are circumstances that mean that organisations require an extension, and the key to that is communication.
Right.
So if things aren't going to plan, contact your community advisor and have a chat and talk to someone about it. And also the same, if the purpose of what you were trying to achieve doesn't quite match, you've kind of learned something and thinking, I can't do this now, but I want to do it like this. Again, it's I'm not going to say no, you can or can't do it, because it kind of really just depends on circumstances, but again, it's communication.
Right.
Have a chat to someone. Yeah.
And you're all very friendly, aren't you?
I think so.
Yeah. I've met lots of you and you're wonderful people.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for that one. This question, we got funding a long time ago from lotteries, but no one ever wrote a results report. So that's the report that you write at the end. Can we apply again? Good question.
Yes. Again, communication. I think you would need to ring someone in Hapai Hapori and have a chat to them, and that person could have a look on, because we have an internal system,
Right.
have a look on our system and see what the accountability requirements were, and there may be just a little bit of information that you have to go through to kind of sign it off, or but we understand that people in organisations change, you know, and so things do slip through. But again, as you said, we're quite friendly, so just ring in and have a chat. So it doesn't, you can apply again, but you may just need to do a little bit of paperwork to sort through that.
Fabulous. Next question. If you have more than $100,000 donation income a year, are you still eligible for COGS and lotteries?
Oh, I would say yes, but I might throw that one over to my colleague Tanya, who's with us online, who's a more experienced community advisor than I am.
Would you like to answer that one for us, Tanya?
Yes, definitely. Hi, everyone. So definitely yes for COGS, and for definitely yes for lottery. For COGS, the organisation must have less than 2 million annual operation expenditure for each of the past 2 years. So yes for both of them, but just highlighting the amount for COGS is, if you have more than 2 million annual expenditure, then no. But for that amount, definitely you can apply to both.
Fabulous, thank you. Lovely to have our subject matter expert on the line. Next question is from Sue. Is there an overview or a calendar somewhere that provides a list of all funding bodies, the type of funding, opening and closing date, to avoid looking at separate trusts each time?
I would say that is probably the Generosity
yes.
New Zealand site.
I would agree.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know if there's a comprehensive website apart from that that provides that information. I think it is potentially a case of having to, you know, scout around the internet and looking at different organisations and what they their criteria are and their closing date. For the Department of Internal Affairs, we have a page on our website, on the Community Matters website, that does list the funds that we administer and manage that have the closing dates for the year ahead for lotteries, community, and all the other ministry, various trusts and things like that. But unfortunately, I don't think there is one complete comprehensive website apart from that Generosity.
I think Generosity New Zealand would probably be the best shot. It's a fabulous question, thanks. So it'd be lovely if somebody did that. How do you get feedback when you're not successful? As some trust bodies simply decline with no comment. That's a tricky one, isn't it?
So it is a difficult one, actually. You can ring and try and get a little bit more information from a person. I know that can be frustrating for groups not to have more specific feedback. I know with some funds there so many applications, and sometimes it can just be a question of there's not enough funding available, you know, that's not a very helpful comment. I'm not sure if Tanya has got anything to add to that about in terms of feedback.
I actually do see that Rebecca wants to answer this question.
No, I don't think she does. I think that's a bit of an error on our side. You're definitely
no worries.
I was going to say, Tanya, you're the coordinator for our lottery committee, and people do ring you, don't they? To get a
yes, definitely. So after a round, we do get a lot of phone calls and emails just for clarification. So how it normally works is we will give you a generic answer of why you were declined. If it is really specific, we will add a little bit extra and note in there that an advisor will contact you to clarify. But we are very happy for anyone to contact us directly if you did receive a decline and you need some more clarification, so we can then explain to you whether it's just because we didn't have enough money to give out or whether there was any other concerns. But we try and be proactive to contact you before you receive the email if there's any really specifics, and then we will work with you for you to reapply in the next round if it was just some technical stuff that we needed to sort out with the committee.
Awesome, that's great. Thanks, Tanya. And so that's for internal affairs grants. I mean, for other trusts, then you'll need to approach them all because they will all have their own criteria, and some may want to discuss it and some may not. But I would say that most would want to. I mean, I can't imagine many funders who fund community work not wanting to actually have a discussion with the community. Yeah. So I think that if you just try and have a chat. Next question. I have 4 very active marae committee volunteers. They spend 20 plus hours a week either cleaning up or maintaining the marae facilities for whānau, hapu, iwi and their community. What fund would be best suited to support these volunteers?
I might pass this one straight to Tanya. Yeah, she's got an overview of all the different funds that DIA has.
Sure thing. I would say for that one specific, you could apply to either COGS or lottery, but depending in where you are in your area, you'll have to look at the local priorities for that COGS committee and that lottery committee. Those priorities also change each year. So please do make sure that you read them before you apply, or just contact your local advisor to work through if that is a possibility, or even incorporating those funds, those expenses in a overall application. So there is ways and means, but it could potentially not be funded through every committee.
Hey, Tanya, are you able to just share a little bit more about the funds that DIA administers in conjunction with TPK?
Yep, sure. So we administer the Oranga Marae funding with TPK, where marae.
Can we just say who TPK are? So TPK are Te Puni Kōkiri, for anyone listening who doesn't know government speak. Sorry, carry on.
No worries. You kind of forget not to use acronyms. Yeah, so Te Puni, and that's probably why, yes. So they work alongside with DIA to give funding to marae for creating the development plans or strategic planning if they don't have one, or if their existing one is out of date. Also technical and feasibility studies, funding those up to 100,000, and also the implementation stage, which is those 3 stages. And there's no minimum or maximum for the implementation stage, but working with a local advisor, they would tell you to do those in different phases. They don't have as much money as actual lottery funding, so not all of the applications do get approved, unfortunately. But yes, there is ways and means to get additional funding, and marae can also get funding through community lottery community funding for minor capital work. So that's also an option if they just have little bits and pieces of work up to 50,000 that they would like to complete.
So that's more about the facilities themselves as opposed to volunteers. Yeah, and if it's the volunteer side, that would be lottery, community, or COGS. Yeah.
So if you wanted a grant, an Oranga Marae grant, do you apply to Te Puni Kōkiri or do you apply to Hapai Hapuri?
So that will be through our system on community matters through Hapai Hapuri. So it's all on the same platform, just to make it easy accessible. And there's also an option to get us to come and do a presentation for you and work through that whole process. So, and you have the option to just work with GIA on that, or just Te Puni Kōkiri, or both of us. So we also have that available.
Great, that it's a lovely collaboration. Next question. Do you publish lists of who has been successful or not, and why or why not?
Yes, we do publish lists of who has been successful. Yeah, so you can do a search on the Community Matters webpage, and that will come up with.
And does it tell you how much they got?
Yes, it does. Won't tell you the specific project. Just I think it's the sheer volume of grants that DIA provides every year, but it'll have the name of the organisation and the amount they received.
Excellent. You mentioned that there are several different funders. And applying to more than one funder?
Yeah, so I mean there are lots of different funders. As I said, there's community trusts, community foundations. Google is your friend in this and finding out who to apply to. Yes, you can apply to more than one funder for the same purpose, because you may be successful with one and not successful for another, but just I think keep both funders informed, because particularly
they talk to each other.
We do. So we, we just in our last lottery round, we had an applicant who said, I'm putting in a request for this particular project, but I've also put in a request to another government department, and if we receive funding from the other government department, then we'll withdraw our application. And we were great, and luckily they did receive funding from the other government department. And yeah.
So is generosity still the best bet to kind of have a look at and see the range of funders?
Yeah, I think so. Or just you could ring your a community advisor, and we have a good idea of what other, so I'm based here in Wellington, so I know about, the Community Foundation in Wellington is the Nico Foundation, and there's the Wellington Community Foundation, which came out of the old bank. So
Joanna Mackenzie. And there's that lovely page on the Charity Services website, how to fund your charity. Great. We're a social service through education, but we are a private school. Funding always blocks schools. What options do we have?
Well, schools can apply to lottery community. So there are, I guess it's always a difficulty that the Ministry of Education is there to support schools to a certain extent, but there are particular projects that schools may be able to have funded through lottery community. So again, I would say contact your local community advisor and talk it through. And I'm just sorry about that. I worked for a private foundation, and just the sheer number of schools, over 2,000, just meant that foundation wasn't able to fund schools.
I'm just thinking of like Creative New Zealand or Sporting New Zealand, depending on the purpose of the grant, you might be able to approach other people. Would you consider funding applications for clubs for sporting equipment that has a benefit to the wider community?
I might give that one to Tanya, as she's very experienced in this one.
Hi. Yeah. So with that one, it is a bit tricky. That will also depend on your local committee priorities. So for our one, we don't normally fund sport equipment, even if it's for wider community benefit. So there needs to be something else linked to it. So if sport is the medium to drive a project, that is a possibility, but anything to do with sport will be deemed a lower priority. It doesn't mean decline, but it would be deemed a lower priority for our committees. So again, communication, like Valerie mentioned, call up or email your local advisor, double check with them what the priorities are, and kind of explain to them what what the wider community benefit will be and how the project will look like, and they will be able to tell you whether or not it would fit or not. But even if we tell you as advisors that it is a very low priority or it's very likely to be declined, you can still put through your application.
Fantastic. That's great advice. Thank you. We previously received feedback from an unsuccessful application that we may have not been awarded funds because the grant organisation wasn't personally familiar with us. And the next time we should reach out beforehand to invite them to come visit us and introduce ourselves in person. Is this a common or uncommon occurrence in your experience?
Well, I guess it's variable, unfortunately, depending on the particular funder that you're working with. So with lottery community funding, which I've been involved with recently, we get organisations that obviously community advisors are very familiar with, but we also get applications from organisations that may have never kind of crossed our path before. But in that case, our process is that we would go and meet with that organisation once they've put a request in. So it is about that relationship based, and it's not just purely on the what you've presented on paper. We make the effort to go and meet with new community groups or groups that are new to us. And yeah, I couldn't speak for other funders. Some funders are purely relationship based now, so they don't have open funding rounds at all. They what they call proactive funders. So they know what their funding criteria are. They know what they're particularly interested in. So they will go and find the relevant groups that are working on that. So yes, I think it's yeah, that's I think it's variable depending on the funder.
Right. Thank you for that. The charities register does not reflect the current office holders in our charity. Will this automatically cause the application to be declined? That's a great question, Larissa.
No, it won't. But I think we would encourage you to, on both, both from Hapai Hapori and both from charity services to update those offices on your charity services entry.
Yes, please. Yes, yeah. You can just log in and update your details. You've got 3 months from your change of offices. So yeah, just do that. That'd be great. Do you publish exemplars of successful grant applications and subsequent reports of achieving outcomes?
Tanya, you might be able to answer that one.
We don't necessarily have those on our website, but we do run local and national Facebook pages for our offices, and we do share stories on there that community groups share with us and give us permission to share on our media platforms. But yeah, to answer that question specifically, we don't publish them on our website now.
Fantastic, thank you. You mentioned that DAA has various sources of funding available. Does DAA have funding available for non-charities which do work for charities? Charities only have limited funds available, and I would like to do more for them faster, and access to funds would help with that.
Yeah, so in that case, we would expect the charity to apply. So, and how a charity chooses who a charity chooses contracts to fill that particular project is up to them. So they may choose to employ a business to fill that project. So we're not going to look into the detail of who's providing that particular service for them, but the charity itself would make the application. We wouldn't be funding
an individual to help a charity.
Yeah, or a private business, but we do fund businesses that have a social purpose. That is a legal entity, a charitable business. But again, yeah, it's a little bit, we don't know what a charity wants or needs, so it's kind of hard for us to fund those services that private services that may be offering business things to charities.
Yeah.
And we don't fund businesses.
And just breaking that down, so this person may mean it's a non-charity, so it's not a registered charity. They might mean that it's not for profit. So that might change. Another not-for-profit might want to help charities, so that could change because you can fund not-for-profits, can't you?
Yeah, so, or you mean non-legal?
Yeah, and not-for-profit, non-legal entity. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you could be a not-for-profit and have a lot of money and not a registered charity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're not a legal entity, you can be funded up to $10,000.
Yeah, so that person might want to get in touch to have a chat.
Yeah.
That might be the easiest because there's a couple of ways to read that question, I think. Where can we find the different funders? Have previously searched charity funding, the results were not the names of family funders available. Our group is a division of a national organisation, but we're seeking local funding. So again, I think the Generosity New Zealand website, the charity services page, talk to an advisor. Valerie mentioned district councils also have funding, your local.
And also Philanthropy New Zealand has a list of their members, so that that can also be a way of finding who are members of Philanthropy New Zealand, and then you can maybe just do a bit of a Google search on that name that they've put up there to see where that organisation is based and what their criteria are. So yeah, again, I think the Charity Services website has got a good list of potential funders and funding sources. So yeah.
So have a look there. Someone is asking, Joshua has missed some of the seminar and he wants to know about diversity income streams. So you talked about that in the beginning, didn't you?
Diversity income.
Well, different. So the
so the
donations.
Yeah, so we talked about the fact that as a not-for-profit or a charity, it's good to have multiple income sources, and so those are things like personal donations, corporate sponsorship, grants is what we talked about main, but there's also contracts that you can get from government departments, there's crowdfunding, give a little, yeah, so those are kind of multiple, but I think, if you Google income sources for not-for-profits or a variation of those words, there's lots of advice about those potential income sources.
Fantastic. Does an organisation need to justify funds in the bank when applying for funding? So you've got 100K in the bank for contingency, but you're applying for 20K.
So for lottery community, for the particular committee that I worked for, which is the Wellington Wairarapa Lottery Community Committee, we talk about well-resourced organisations being a lower priority. And at the moment, we kind of look at your working capital, and if you've got more than 24 months working capital, then you would be a lower priority for our particular committee, unless you can say, we've got a lot of money in the bank because we are saving it to replace our building. Right. You know, so if the funding is tagged for something and you can explain why you've got, you know, kind of a high amount of assets available, then that explains why you may have that, and so you may not be considered financially well resourced because you've identified what's that for. So it's a variable again between funders as to what they look at.
So depending on why you've accumulated 100K, you may be able to apply not, but again, have a conversation with your funder. If you have an interest on investment, can I get those funds? Not really sure I understand that question, do you?
So your when your application is being considered, if I think about lottery community, we would be reviewing all your income sources that you're proposing, and that's kind of related to that last question when we talked about are you considered a financially well-resourced organisation already? So we would look to see if you've got funds invested, which you potentially could be earning interest on.
Right.
And again, if you can say these funds are invested for these reasons because we want to buy a new building, then that means that you wouldn't be excluded from receiving lottery community funding because you've got a good explanation as to why you may have a lot of money invested and why you're earning interest. So it's case by case basis, and having a conversation, communication, talking it through.
Yeah, cool. So we've only got time for a couple more questions, so we'll take these next two. One, do you put in costs inclusive or exclusive of GST?
I may throw that over to Tanya. It depends, I think, if you're GST registered. But Tanya, are you able to answer that one?
Yeah, what Francesca said, it depends on whether or not you are registered, and that will depend on what you put in. So if you're not registered, you won't include it. If you are, then you will include it.
Fantastic. Okay, and the last one we're going to take today is from Mandy. There's some particularly demanding reporting requirement for minimal grant amounts. The amount of time spent on gathering information, accounts, leaving little in actual grant amount. It would be wonderful if the smaller ones, like if it's 2,000, could be looked at to see if there's any way to tighten this while still meeting necessary documentation requirements. So I think that's more of a statement just to say sometimes with those really small grants, you have to do quite a lot of work to get them, and then a little bit of work afterwards, and you really don't get much out of that.
Yeah, and I would say I agree, and I know there's quite a lot of advocacy going on in the sector to talk about this kind of stuff, and Hui, which is an umbrella organisation for the community, talks about this quite often and works with Philanthropy New Zealand to have these discussions. And
fabulous. And we haven't discussed, and I'll just put it in it before we go, the Match website that Philanthropy New Zealand has put up. So it's MATCH, Match. Have a look at that. So that Philanthropy New Zealand have kind of flipped grant funding around, whereas funders listed on the website saying what they want to fund. And is it right? No, groups are listed on the website, and funders can look to see what groups are wanting funding. So flipping it on its head. We are out of time. What a shame. We could talk about funding for a lot longer. I just want to thank everyone for their input into the webinar. We had some really great questions today. If your question hasn't been answered, you can email us on that info@charities.gov.nz, and we will send you an email reply back. We will use our lovely expertise of Valerie and Tanya for that, because at Charity Services, we don't fund charities. It has been a pleasure to be working with you, Valerie. I've really enjoyed getting to know you better and to just have some more information about how to make funding applications more successful.
Thanks, Francesca.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before we go, I just want to remind you that the webinar is being recorded, and we will send you a link so you can watch it again if you missed something, and we will send you a resource sheet with some information about some links and where to find some of the things that we've talked about today. So lastly, I just want to say thank you. Thanks very much for tuning in today. I know you're all very busy, and you're taking time out of your busy days. Thanks also for the work you do in your community. You're all amazing, and I hope you have taken away some hot tips and have some successful applications. Make sure you get in touch with your friendly community advisor. There's how many offices around the country? 16 offices around the country, so you'll find one near you. Go to the Community Matters website. We'll send you a link. Thanks for everything. And also, just one last hot tip. If you want to know about our upcoming webinars, make sure you're signed up to our Facebook page and our newsletter. Our newsletter came out yesterday, and so I think a lot of you found out about this webinar because of that. So if you do sign up to those things, you'll know when they're coming up. I'd just like to say thanks to our team in the room today who kept everything running smoothly. And ka kite anō, we'll see you at our next webinar. Thanks for joining in today.